think about last night. You got into bed, closed your eyes, and eventually woke up this morning. Somewhere between those two moments, 8 entire hours disappeared. Gone. Not forgotten, not blurry, but completely absent from your conscious experience. And that's strange, because sleep is something we experience every single day. By adulthood, you've fallen asleep thousands of times, yet you still cannot explain what the exact moment of falling asleep feels like. You remember being awake. You remember feeling tired. You remember your dreams. But the transition itself remains invisible. The reason begins with a chemical called adenosine. From the moment you wake up, your brain consumes enormous amounts of energy, and adenosine slowly starts building up. Hour after hour, it accumulates, creating what scientists call sleep pressure. The longer you remain awake, the stronger that pressure becomes. Interestingly, coffee doesn't actually give you more energy. It simply blocks adenosine receptors, preventing your brain from recognizing how tired it really is. The exhaustion is still there. Your brain just can't hear the signal anymore. It's like covering the warning lights on your car dashboard instead of fixing the problem itself. Meanwhile, another system is quietly controlling your entire biological rhythm. Deep inside the hypothalamus lies a tiny structure called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, your body's internal clock. As darkness approaches, this clock signals the release of melatonin, lowers your body temperature, and gradually prepares your brain for sleep. Then something remarkable happens. A group of neurons in the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus begins suppressing the chemicals responsible for wakefulness. Norepinephrine, serotonin, and histamine slowly lose their influence. Your brain is literally talking itself out of being awake. But the greatest mystery involves the thalamus, the gateway between your senses and your conscious mind. Every sound, every touch, every image passes through the structure before becoming part of your experience. Yet as sleep approaches, the gates begin to close. The world outside doesn't disappear. Your brain simply stops delivering that information to the parts of you that create awareness. And that's why you never remember falling asleep. The systems responsible for recording memories begin shutting down before consciousness completely vanishes. The observer disappears before it can witness its own disappearance. And every night, this extraordinary neurological performance unfolds without an audience, because the audience itself is falling asleep. The story, however, gets even stranger, because feeling tired is not the same thing as actually falling asleep. At some point during the night, your brain makes a decision that you never witness. Deep inside your hypothalamus, a small group of neurons called the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus becomes active. Their mission is simple: turn consciousness off. These neurons begin releasing chemicals that suppress the brain's arousal systems. Norepinephrine slows down. Serotonin levels change. Histamine production decreases. The very substances that kept you alert throughout the day begin losing their influence. It's almost as if one part of your brain is gently convincing another part that it's finally time to let go. Scientists sometimes describe this process as a neurological switch. Not because sleep happens instantly, but because once the balance tips far enough, the brain rapidly commits to shutting itself down. And then, the most important player enters the story: the thalamus. If the brain were a giant corporation, the thalamus would be the receptionist. Everything passes through it. Every sound, every image, every sensation, every touch, the feeling of your pillow, the noise of a car outside, the cool air from a fan. All of it must first travel through the thalamus before reaching your conscious mind. Without it, reality itself becomes inaccessible. And when sleep approaches, the thalamus slowly closes its gates. The outside world doesn't stop existing. Your brain simply stops delivering that information to the parts responsible for awareness. The sound is still there. The sensation is still there. But you can no longer experience it. This is one of the greatest tricks your brain ever performs. Because while the world continues exactly as before, your personal experience of reality begins fading away. And something even more important happens at the same time. Your memory systems begin shutting down. The hippocampus, the structure responsible for converting experiences into long-term memories, starts changing its priorities. During the day, its job is to record, to preserve, to build the story of your life. But at night, its responsibilities are completely different. Instead of creating new memories, it prepares to organize old ones, to clean up information, to decide what deserves to survive, and what can safely be forgotten, which creates a fascinating problem. How can you remember falling asleep if the system responsible for making memories stops recording before the event is finished? The answer is simple. You can't. The final moments of consciousness are happening inside a brain that is gradually losing its ability to document itself. It's like trying to save a file while the computer is shutting down. Some information makes it through. Most of it disappears forever. And perhaps the strangest part of all is that this happens every single night, without fear, without resistance, without even a second thought. Human beings willingly surrender consciousness, thousands of times throughout their lives. We trust that we'll come back in the morning. We trust that our memories will remain intact. We trust that the person who wakes up will still be us. And somehow, that trust is almost never broken. But the mystery remains, because the exact moment when awareness vanishes, the precise instant when the observer disappears, can never be observed. The witness is part of the process itself. And by the time the performance reaches its final act, the audience has already gone home. But the story doesn't end there, because before your brain fully enters sleep, it passes through one of the strangest states a human being can experience. A place between two worlds, not fully awake and not fully asleep. Scientists call this state hypnagogia, and almost everyone experiences it, yet very few people even know it exists. During this brief transition, something extraordinary begins to happen. The brain starts creating its own reality. You might see flashes of light, geometric patterns, random faces, strange places that don't exist, fragments of conversations, or music that nobody is actually playing. These are not dreams, and they are not signs that something is wrong. They are perfectly normal. They are simply the mind, learning how to disconnect from reality. For a few moments, the boundaries between imagination and perception become incredibly thin. The outside world grows quieter. The inner world grows louder, and the two begin blending together. Perhaps the most famous example is the sensation of falling. Almost everyone knows this feeling. You're drifting off peacefully, and suddenly, you feel yourself falling from a great height. Your entire body jerks violently. Your heart races, and you're awake again. Scientists call this phenomenon the hypnic jerk. One theory suggests that the brain misinterprets muscle relaxation as a loss of balance. As your body begins preparing for sleep, the nervous system briefly panics. It assumes something is wrong and sends an emergency signal to catch yourself. Whether this explanation is completely correct or not, nobody knows for certain, but it reveals something fascinating. Even in the modern world, your brain still carries ancient survival mechanisms that evolved millions of years ago. And those systems continue operating, whether you notice them or not. But here's the truly strange part. Most people remember absolutely none of this. The lights, the sounds, the falling sensation, the brief hallucinations, all of it disappears. Not because it never happened, but because the brain wasn't properly recording the experience. The camera was already shutting down. Researchers who wake people during these early stages of sleep often hear bizarre descriptions. People report floating shapes, disconnected images, random thoughts that make no sense, faces appearing out of nowhere, entire scenes with no story or logic behind them. It's almost like watching your imagination run freely without the rules imposed by conscious thought. And yet, within seconds, those experiences vanish forever. The memory dissolves. The details disappear. Nothing remains. This makes hypnagogia one of the most private experiences in human existence. Every single night, your brain creates a tiny universe, a personal collection of sounds, images, and sensations, and then destroys the evidence before morning arrives. No witnesses, no recordings, no memories, just a silent performance for an audience that is slowly falling asleep. Perhaps that's why sleep feels so mysterious, because the journey itself never makes it into the final story. You only remember the beginning, and then you remember the end. Everything in between belongs entirely to the unconscious mind. But perhaps the most unsettling part of all is what sleep reveals about consciousness itself. Most of us think of our lives as one continuous experience, a single story that begins when we're born and moves forward without interruption, day after day, year after year. But every single night, that story simply stops. For roughly 8 hours, you are gone, not dreaming, not thinking, not observing, just absent. And the strangest thing is, you never notice the absence, because noticing the absence of consciousness would require consciousness itself. This is a mystery that has fascinated philosophers for thousands of years. The ancient Greeks believed that sleep and death were closely related, not because sleep was dangerous, but because both involved the temporary disappearance of the self. Hypnos, the god of sleep, was said to be the twin brother of Thanatos, the god of death. Every night, human beings willingly surrender control. We close our eyes. We allow awareness to fade. And somehow, we trust that everything will return in the morning. Our memories, our personalities, our identities. The person who wakes up feels exactly like the person who went to bed. But what actually connects those two moments? What remains constant when consciousness itself disappears? Modern neuroscience offers some answers. During sleep, the brain doesn't simply shut down. It begins one of the most important maintenance processes in human biology. Memories are sorted. Experiences are organized. Important information is strengthened. Unnecessary details are removed. It's a little like a librarian working through the night, putting every book back in its proper place. Without this process, learning becomes difficult. Emotions become unstable. Decision-making suffers. Sleep is not a passive state. It is active repair, an essential form of biological maintenance. And perhaps, the reason we don't remember falling asleep is because the brain considers that information completely unnecessary. From an evolutionary perspective, there is no advantage in remembering the exact moment consciousness disappeared. No survival benefit, no practical use. The experience itself offers nothing valuable to keep. So the brain makes a choice, focuses on rest, instead of documentation, prioritizes recovery over memory, and in doing so, it creates one of the most universal mysteries of human existence. Every night, a remarkable neurological performance takes place. Adenosine builds up, melatonin rises, the hypothalamus suppresses wakefulness, the thalamus closes its gates. The hippocampus shifts into maintenance mode. The prefrontal cortex, the very center of self-awareness, gradually powers down. And somewhere within that process, the observer disappears. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly, gently, almost beautifully, until there is nobody left to witness the final moments. And then, morning arrives. The world returns. The story continues. You wake up believing that your consciousness has remained continuous, even though an entire chapter unfolded without your awareness. And perhaps, that is exactly how nature intended it. Because if human beings remembered every strange hallucination, every fading thought, every moment of their own consciousness shutting down, sleep might become something terrifying. Instead, the brain gives us a gift. It hides the mystery. It removes the evidence and allows us to trust the process. Again and again, for an entire lifetime, you will fall asleep thousands of times. You will never remember a single one. And somehow, that is completely okay. And yet, scientists have discovered something even stranger. The moment you think you're still awake, you might already be asleep. This phenomenon is known as sleep state misperception, and it completely changes the way we think about consciousness. In sleep laboratories around the world, researchers have encountered people who insist they never slept at all. They claim they remained awake for hours, listening to every sound, thinking every thought, watching the night slowly pass by. But when scientists examine their brain activity, the evidence tells a completely different story. The brain waves clearly show they were asleep, not just for a few moments, but for most of the night. So who was right, the person or the brain? The answer is both fascinating and deeply unsettling, because your experience of being conscious is not always an accurate reflection of reality. The little voice inside your head, the narrator that tells the story of your life, can sometimes continue speaking even as parts of the brain have already entered sleep. It's possible for some regions to remain active, while others begin shutting down. Modern neuroscience describes sleep not as a single event, but as a local process. Different parts of the brain can fall asleep at different times. Imagine an enormous city at night. The business districts close first. The offices turn off their lights. The streets become quiet. But somewhere, a few neighborhoods remain awake. Restaurants stay open. People continue moving. Life goes on, just a little longer. Your brain works in much the same way. The regions responsible for attention might already be resting, while sensory systems remain partially active. The prefrontal cortex, the part most closely associated with self-awareness and logical thinking, begins losing activity surprisingly early. And that creates a remarkable problem. The very system required to notice yourself falling asleep is among the first systems to disappear. The observer leaves the room before the event is over, which means there may never be a precise moment when consciousness ends. No sharp boundary, no dramatic switch, just a gradual fading, like sunlight disappearing after sunset. At first, everything seems normal. Then colors become softer. Details become harder to see. The world grows quieter. And eventually, without realizing exactly when it happened, night has arrived. Perhaps consciousness works the same way. Perhaps there isn't a single instant when you fall asleep. Perhaps the question itself assumes something that doesn't actually exist. Because if awareness fades gradually, then asking for the exact moment it disappeared is like asking for the precise second that evening becomes night. The transition is real, but the boundary is impossible to find. And maybe that is why this mystery has remained with humanity for thousands of years. Every person who has ever lived has experienced it. Kings and philosophers, scientists and artists, children and grandparents, all of them crossed that invisible border, and none of them ever brought back a memory of the journey. The greatest shared human experience is one that nobody remembers, and perhaps that makes it even more extraordinary. So, why can't you remember falling asleep? Perhaps the answer is simpler than we imagined. The brain isn't failing to record the experience. It is deliberately letting it go. Consciousness doesn't disappear in a single moment. It slowly fades, one region at a time, until there is nobody left to witness the transition. The journey into sleep was never meant to be remembered, only completed. And maybe there is something beautiful about that. Every night, human beings surrender to the unknown, trusting that when morning comes, they will return exactly as they were. And somehow, they always do. The greatest mystery of sleep isn't that we forget the journey, but that we never needed to remember it in the first place.